Have you ever watched a victory lap turn into a public execution because of one careless remark? I walked away from my marriage in total silence, refusing to scream or fight over scraps. Yet, on the day my ex married his mistress, a complete stranger dropped a sentence that drained every drop of color from the groom's face. The terrifying part was that it was the absolute truth. My name is Brianna Hayes, and I am 33 years old. If you looked at me from across the room, you would likely see a woman who is composed, perhaps a little too still, sitting with her hands folded on the white tablecloth of a restaurant that costs more for a salad than most people spend on a week of groceries. You would not see a victim. You would not see a woman on the verge of a breakdown. You would simply see someone who has learned that silence is often the only shield that actually works. I sat at a corner table at the Gilded Lily, the exact spot where Logan had proposed to me 8 years ago. The irony was not lost on me, but I did not find it funny. It was just a fact, cold and hard like the marble flooring in the foyer. Back then, he had been nervous, his hands shaking as he held the velvet box. Tonight, I had been waiting for 45 minutes, and the only thing shaking was the ice melting in my untouched water glass. When Logan finally arrived, he did not rush. He walked with that confident, long-legged stride that used to make my heart stutter in my chest. Now, it just looked like arrogance. He pulled out the chair opposite me, the scrape of wood against the floor the loudest sound between us. He did not apologize. He did not lean in to kiss my cheek. He barely looked at me. His eyes were glued to the screen of his phone, his thumbs flying across the glass keyboard, answering an email or a text message that was undoubtedly more important than the wife he had not really seen in 3 years. I ordered a bottle of sparkling water. He ordered a scotch. Neat. That was our dynamic now. I was clarity. He was the burn. I watched him for a long moment. He was handsome, objectively speaking. At 35, he had the kind of polished, corporate look that screams success. The tailored navy suit, the watch that cost $15,000, the hair styled perfectly into place, but to me, he looked like a stranger wearing my husband's skin. The connection between us had not snapped suddenly. It had eroded, grain by sand grain, until there was nothing left but a vast, dry canyon. For 8 years, I had been starving, not for food, but for something that sustains you much more than bread or meat. I was starved for attention, for affection, for a simple question about how my day went that did not feel like a logistical inquiry. I had been living in a beautiful house that felt like a museum, careful not to touch the exhibits, careful not to make a sound. I had become an accessory to his life, a silent partner in the business of being Logan Hayes. "I am leaving Chicago," I said. My voice was steady. I had practiced this sentence in the mirror for 2 weeks. I expected it to sound like a thunderclap, but in the hum of the restaurant, it sounded more like a dropped napkin, soft, inconsequential. Logan did not look up immediately. He finished typing a sentence, hit send, and then slowly placed the phone on the table. Face up, the screen glowed with a notification, but I did not look at it. I did not have to. "Leaving?" he asked, picking up his menu as if I had just told him we were out of milk. "For a trip? A vacation might be good for you. You have been looking a bit pale lately." "No," I said, my hands tightening slightly in my lap. "I am moving, permanently. I have contacted a lawyer. The papers will be sent to your office on Monday morning." Finally, he stopped. He lowered the menu and looked at me. There was no shock in his eyes. There was no pain. There was just a flicker of annoyance, the kind a man gets when a meeting runs 5 minutes over schedule. He took a sip of his scotch, the amber liquid disappearing behind his lips, and set the glass down with a precise click. "Is this about the late nights?" he asked. His tone was bored. "Because we have talked about this. Brianna, the merger is entering a critical phase. I cannot be home by 6 o'clock to hold your hand." "It is not about the merger, Logan," I said. "It is about the fact that I have been alone in this marriage since the day we bought the house in Lincoln Park. It is about the fact that you do not know the name of the last book I read, or that I stopped drinking coffee 2 years ago, or that I hate this restaurant. He sighed, a long, suffering sound that was meant to make me feel small. It usually worked. Tonight, it just felt tired. "So, that is it?" he asked. "You are just quitting? 8 years? And you are just walking away because you are bored?" "I am not bored, Logan. I am empty." He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time in months, and then he did something that solidified every decision I had made in the last 6 months. He shrugged. He actually shrugged, picked up his drink, and swirled the ice around. "Well," he said, his voice terrifyingly practical, "if that is what you want, I suppose it saves us a complicated conversation down the road. Honestly, it might be for the best. My schedule is only going to get tighter next quarter." He paused, and then dropped the name I had been waiting for. He did not say it with guilt. He said it with the casual utility of a man discussing a new software update. "Tessa can probably handle the logistics of the house once you are gone," he said. "She has been managing my schedule for 3 years. She knows how things run. It makes sense, really. She is very organized, a valid replacement for the administrative side of things. At least." Tessa Lane, his executive assistant, 24 years old, bright eyes, ambitious smile, and a way of looking at Logan that made me feel like furniture. Hearing him say her name so casually, positioning her not just as a lover but as a staffing solution to the vacancy I was leaving, was a specific kind of violence. It was not a physical blow, but it knocked the wind out of me all the same. He was not confessing to an affair. He was skipping the confession because he assumed I already knew, or worse, that I did not care enough to object. He was right about one thing. I did not want to object. I did not want to scream. I did not want to throw my water in his face. That is what people do when they still have hope, when they think the relationship is worth fighting for. I had no hope. "You are moving Tessa in?" I asked. It was barely a question. "It is practical," he said, signaling the waiter for the check, even though we had not ordered food. "She needs a place closer to the city, and I need someone who understands the demands of my career. Do not look at me like that. Brianna, we are adults. Let us not pretend this marriage has been a romance novel for a long time." The waiter arrived, sensing the tension, and placed the leather folder on the table. Logan threw a black credit card onto the tray without checking the total. "Where are you going?" he asked, signing the receipt with a flourish. "Maine," I said. "Seabrook Hollow." He paused, the pen hovering over the paper. "That old shack your grandmother left you?" "Brianna, be serious. That place is falling apart. You are a city girl. You will be back in 3 months when the heating fails, or you run out of Chardonnay." "I am not coming back, Logan." He laughed. It was a short, dry sound. "Everyone says that. Look, take the settlement. I will tell the lawyers to be generous. I do not want a fight. I just want this done cleanly. No press, no drama. I have a reputation to maintain." "You will get your clean break," I said. I stood up. My legs felt steady. "I do not want your money, Logan. I just want out." He looked up at me, and for a second, I saw a flash of confusion. In his world, everyone wanted money, everyone had a price. The idea that I just wanted to be absent from his life was a concept he could not quite grasp. "Everyone will be fine, Brianna," he said, slipping his phone back into his pocket. "You will see. In a year, we will look back at this and realize it was just a transaction that had run its course. A transaction. That was all I was to him. An asset that had depreciated until it was no longer worth the maintenance cost." "Goodbye, Logan," I said. I turned and walked away. I did not look back. I knew what he was doing. He was probably already texting Tessa, telling her the coast was clear, telling her that the house was hers. I walked out of the restaurant and into the cool Chicago night air. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the exhaust and the wind. I felt lighter. I felt like a ghost who had finally realized she was dead and could stop haunting the hallways of a life that did not belong to her. I thought that was the end of it. I thought I could drive away, disappear into the salt air of the East Coast, and scrub the name Logan Hayes off my skin like dead cells. I was wrong. I thought I was walking away from the fire, leaving it to burn itself out behind me. I did not know that the sparks were already catching in the wind, drifting toward the future, waiting for the one moment when they would land on something truly explosive. Logan thought he had won. He thought he had replaced me. But he had forgotten one thing about me, one thing that even 8 years of silence had not erased. The past does not stay buried just because you build a new life on top of it. Sometimes, it waits. It waits for the perfect moment to stand up and speak, and when it does not whisper, it screams. People often imagine that the end of a marriage sounds like a gunshot. They expect screaming matches, thrown vases, or the screech of tires peeling out of a driveway. They wait for the explosion, but the death of my marriage to Logan was not a detonation. It was a slow, quiet suffocation. It was the sound of air leaving a room, day after day, until there was simply nothing left to breathe. I spent the days leading up to our dinner at the Gilded Lily, dissecting how we had arrived at this desolate place. I needed to understand the anatomy of the decay before I could cut it out of me. In the beginning, 8 years ago, Logan and I were teammates. We were 2 hungry kids in a drafty 1-bedroom apartment, eating instant noodles and dreaming of the skyline we could see from our single, grime-streaked window. Back then, my opinion was the only one that mattered to him. We strategized his career moves over cheap wine. I edited his resumes. I rehearsed his pitches with him until 2 a.m. When he landed his first major contract, he did not call his parents or his friends. He ran home to me, lifted me off the floor, and spun me around until we were both dizzy with the promise of the future. But as Logan ascended, the dynamic shifted, slowly, imperceptibly. I stopped being his partner and started being his infrastructure. I became the invisible logistics department of Logan Hayes, Incorporated. I was the one who remembered his mother's birthday and bought the gift he would take credit for. I was the one who ensured his suits were dry cleaned and his passport was renewed. I managed the contractors, the bills, the social calendar, and the image. I smoothed the road in front of him so he never had to look down to see where he was stepping. And because he never looked down, he eventually stopped seeing me altogether. He did not abuse me. He did not hit me. He did not call me names. In some ways, that would have been easier to handle because hatred is at least a form of passion. It acknowledges your existence. Instead, Logan weaponized indifference. He looked through me. When I spoke about my day, his eyes would glaze over, or he would interrupt with a question about whether I had picked up his dry cleaning. If I expressed an opinion on his business, he would offer a condescending smile, the kind you give a child who has drawn a picture, and say that I did not understand the complexities of the current market. I was no longer the woman who helped build him. I was just another appliance in his well-appointed house, expected to function silently and stay in my designated corner. That was the soil in which Tessa Lane took root. I do not blame her entirely. A happy marriage is a fortress. Ours was a ruin with the doors wide open. Tessa did not have to break in. She just walked through the gap where Logan's respect for me used to be. The discovery happened on a Tuesday, 3 months before I asked for the divorce. It was a cliché. Really. Logan had left his laptop open on the kitchen island. He had gone up to shower, confident in his security, or perhaps just arrogant enough to believe I was too stupid to look. A message bubble popped up in the corner of the screen. Did you tell her about the weekend yet? Or are we playing the emergency client meeting card again? I froze. My hand hovered over the trackpad. I knew that if I clicked it, there was no going back. I knew that my life as I understood it would end the moment the pixelated window expanded. I clicked. It was not just one message. It was a thread that went back 6 months. I stood in my kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound, and read the transcript of my husband's emotional relocation. They talked about work, certainly, but they also talked about dreams. He told her things he had stopped telling me years ago. He told her about his fear of stagnation, his desire to buy a boat, his hatred of the suburbs, and she fed his ego, telling him he was a visionary, a king surrounded by people who did not appreciate his genius. But what shattered me was not the romance, it was the mockery. In one exchange, Tessa had asked if he felt guilty about leaving me alone for their upcoming trip to Aspen. Logan's reply was short. Brianna won't even notice. She is happy as long as the house is clean and the bills are paid. She is like a piece of vintage furniture. Nice to look at, but you don't really interact with it. Vintage furniture. I stared at those words until they blurred. I waited for the rage. I waited for the urge to run upstairs, throw the laptop into the shower with him, and scream until my throat bled. I waited to feel the hot, burning desire to slash his tires or burn his suits. But the rage did not come. Instead, a cold, clarifying calm washed over me. I realized then that if I confronted him, I would lose. If I ran upstairs crying, holding the laptop like a smoking gun, Logan would not fall to his knees and beg for forgiveness. He would roll his eyes. He would tell me I was invading his privacy. He would say I was hysterical, that I was overreacting, that Tessa was just a colleague and I was reading into things because I was insecure. He would gaslight me until I questioned my own sanity. He would turn my pain into a performance of his own victimhood, complaining about how suffocating I was. I closed the laptop exactly as he had left it. I went back to chopping vegetables for the salad he would barely touch. When he came downstairs, smelling of expensive soap, I asked him how his day was. I watched him lie to my face without even blinking. He told me he was tired. He told me work was draining him. He looked right at me, and I saw absolutely nothing behind his eyes. That was the moment the marriage truly ended. Not in a courtroom, but in a kitchen, over a pile of chopped cucumbers. The next day, I did not go to a marriage counselor. I went to a lawyer. Not the high-profile shark Logan used for his business deals, but a quiet, ruthless woman recommended by a friend of a friend. For 3 months, I played the part of the oblivious wife. I was an actor on a stage, hitting my marks. While Logan was working late with Tessa, I was photocopying tax returns. While he was texting her from the bathroom, I was downloading bank statements and highlighting inconsistent withdrawals. I separated my inheritance from our joint assets. I secured the deed to my grandmother's house in Maine. I quietly moved my personal savings into an account he could not touch. I did it all with the efficiency he claimed I lacked. I was not emotional. I was surgical. Logan noticed the change, but he misinterpreted it completely. He saw my silence and thought it was submission. He thought I had finally accepted my place as the background noise of his life. He even seemed happier, more relaxed, because I had stopped asking him for things he did not want to give. He brought me flowers once, a generic bouquet from a grocery store, as a reward for being so low maintenance. He thought I was settling. He had no idea I was packing. He believed that because I did not fight, I did not care. He believed that because I did not scream, I was not angry. He underestimated me because he had spent years convincing himself I was simple. He forgot that the vintage furniture he mocked had eyes and ears. But the final twist, the thing that drove me out the door, was not Tessa. I could have fought for him. I could have demanded he fire her. I could have dragged us to therapy and tried to repair the cracks. But as I looked at the evidence of his betrayal, I realized something terrifying. I did not want to win him back. I looked at the woman in the mirror, the woman who checked his phone logs, the woman who analyzed his receipts, the woman who was preparing for a war over a man who called her furniture, and I did not recognize her. I was becoming bitter. I was becoming paranoid. I was becoming small. If I stayed, even if I won and got rid of Tessa, I would spend the rest of my life policing him. I would spend every day wondering who he was texting. I would turn into a jailer, guarding an empty cell. I would lose the last shred of Brianna Hayes and be replaced entirely by Logan's suspicious wife. I was not leaving because I was heartbroken. I was leaving because I was terrified that if I stayed one day longer, the Brianna who had dreams and talent and a voice would be gone forever, dead and buried under the weight of his ego. So I walked away. I let him think he had won. I let him think he was trading up. I let him have the victory, the mistress, and the house. I took the only thing that mattered. I took myself back, and he never even saw it coming. Driving out of Chicago felt less like leaving home and more like escaping a high-security prison where the walls were made of polite conversation and the bars were constructed from social expectations. As the skyline shrank in my rearview mirror, dissolving into the gray haze of the highway, I waited for the panic to set in. I waited for the terrifying realization that I was 33 years old, single, and driving a packed sedan toward a future that was completely blank. But the panic never arrived. Instead, with every mile that put distance between me and the suffocating elegance of Lincoln Park, my chest loosened. By the time I crossed the state line, I was breathing deeper than I had in a decade. Seabrook Hollow was not the kind of town you found on a travel brochure. It did not have flashy boardwalks or overpriced lobster shacks designed for tourists in pastel shorts. It was a rugged, working-class town on the coast of Maine, where the ocean was not a backdrop for selfies, but a force of nature that demanded respect. The air here was heavy with salt and pine, and the wind had teeth. I pulled up to my grandmother's house just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold. The house was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood summers, though perhaps a bit more tired. It was a small, shingled cottage perched on a bluff overlooking the water, surrounded by a garden that had long since decided to grow wild. Hydrangeas the size of basketballs bowed their heavy blue heads over the walkway, and the grass was knee-high. It was nothing like the glass and steel mausoleum I had shared with Logan. There were no smart home systems here, no heated floors, no minimalist Italian furniture that looked beautiful but felt like sitting on a concrete block. I turned the key in the lock, and the door groaned open. The smell hit me instantly, a mixture of cedar, old books, and the faint, sweet scent of dried lavender. It was the smell of safety. I dropped my bags in the hallway and walked into the living room. Dust motes danced in the shafts of dying light. The furniture was old, mismatched, and covered in white sheets like sleeping ghosts. I pulled the sheet off the nearest armchair, a worn velvet wingback that had seen better days. I sat down. For the first time in 8 years, I was sitting in a room that did not demand anything from me. The silence here was not the sharp, weaponized silence of my marriage. It was a heavy, comforting blanket. I was not Logan Hayes's wife here. I was not the failed partner. I was just a woman in a house by the sea, and for tonight, that was enough. The first few weeks were a blur of physical labor and quiet healing. I scrubbed floors until my knees ached. I hacked away at the brambles in the garden until my hands were scratched and calloused. I painted the kitchen a soft, buttery yellow, because Logan had always insisted on stark, clinical white. Every morning, I walked along the shoreline. The Atlantic Ocean was violent and beautiful. It crashed against the rocks with a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat, reminding me that the world was vast and indifferent to my small tragedies. I found comfort in that indifference. In Chicago, everyone watched. Here, the fishermen repairing their nets on the pier barely glanced up as I passed. To them, I was just another figure in a coat, battling the wind. I learned to eat again. That sounds strange to say. But dinner with Logan had become a performance art piece where I had to be charming, decorative, and grateful. Now, I ate toast with avocado at the kitchen counter while reading a paperback. I made soup and ate it straight from the pot. I drank cheap red wine out of a mug. The knot in my stomach, the one that had been tight and hard for years, began to unravel. But a person cannot live on salt air and solitude forever. I needed a purpose. I needed to prove to myself that the brain Logan had dismissed as irrelevant was still functional. I found Harborline Atelier by accident. I had gone into town to buy hardware supplies and saw the sign swinging above a brick storefront. Harborline Atelier, Interior and Architectural Design. The windows were large and clean, displaying not trendy, mass-produced junk, but beautiful, hand-drawn blueprints and samples of reclaimed wood. I went home, updated my portfolio, dusting off projects I had done before Logan, and a few I had designed secretly in my head during those lonely nights in Chicago, and printed my resume. When I walked into the studio 2 days later, a bell chimed above the door. The space smelled of sawdust and strong coffee. Tables were covered in fabric swatches, drafting paper, and architectural models. A man emerged from the back office. He looked to be in his late 50s, with salt and pepper hair, a thick beard, and eyes that looked like they had spent a lifetime squinting at fine details. He wiped his hands on a canvas apron. "We are not buying anything today," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. "I am not selling anything," I replied, placing my portfolio on the nearest table. "I am Brianna Hayes. I saw your sign. I am a designer, and I am looking for work." He looked at the portfolio, then at me. He did not ask who I was. He did not ask where I came from or why a woman dressed in city clothes was standing in his shop in Seabrook Hollow. He just opened the black binder. His name was Graham Sutter, and he was the owner. He flipped through my pages in silence. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was terrified he would see the gap in my employment history, the 8-year hole where my career should have been. I was terrified he would ask about my husband. He stopped at a sketch I had done of a library renovation. He tapped the page with a calloused finger. "The light source here," he said. "Why did you choose a clerestory window instead of a skylight?" I blinked. It was a technical question, a real professional question. "Because skylights in that climate are prone to leaking," I said, my voice gaining strength. "And the client wanted indirect light to protect the book bindings. A clerestory provides consistent, diffuse illumination without the direct UV damage." Graham nodded. He turned the page. "And this material? Is that reclaimed oak?" "Chestnut," I corrected him. "It has a warmer grain, and it resists rot better if we are talking about a coastal property." He closed the binder and looked me in the eye. "I have a backlog of 3 projects. My junior designer quit last week to move to Portland. The pay is not what you would get in a big city, and the hours are long when we are on a deadline. Can you start on Monday?" I stood there, stunned. No questions about my marital status. No questions about why I was alone. Just the work. "Monday is perfect," I said. Working at Harborline was the final step in my exorcism of Logan Hayes. For the first time in nearly a decade, my voice mattered. One afternoon, 3 weeks into the job, we were in a meeting with a client. A wealthy couple from New York building a summer home. The husband was blustering about wanting a marble staircase that would have looked ridiculous in a seaside cottage. Graham was trying to be diplomatic, but the client was not listening. "It needs to make a statement," the man insisted. "It needs to look expensive." I looked at the blueprints, then at the client. "If you use marble," I said, speaking up from the corner of the table, "the salt air and the sand tracked in from the beach will etch the finish within 6 months. It will not look expensive. It will look dirty. If you want a statement, use local granite with a honed finish. It connects the house to the landscape. It is indestructible, and it costs more than the marble, so everyone will know you spent the money." The room went silent. The client looked at me, surprised. Then he looked at his wife. "I like her," the wife said. "She is right. Let us do the granite." Graham shot me a small, approving smile. It was a tiny victory, a microscopic moment in the grand scheme of the universe, but for me, it was monumental. I had spoken, I had been heard, and the world had not ended. I walked out of the studio that evening feeling a sense of lightness I had forgotten existed. The wind off the harbor was cold, but I did not button my coat. I wanted to feel it. I wanted to feel everything. I had done it. I had escaped. I was Brianna Hayes, designer at Harborline Atelier. I lived in a house that smelled of lavender. I paid my own bills. I was building a life that had absolutely nothing to do with Logan. I drove home along the winding coastal road, watching the moon rise over the water. I thought about the text messages I had read on Logan's laptop. The way he had dismissed me as furniture. I thought about his smug certainty that I would come crawling back when the heating failed. The heating had failed last week. I had fixed it myself with a wrench and a YouTube tutorial. I parked my car and walked up the path to the cottage. The hydrangeas were glowing like pale ghosts in the moonlight. I felt safe. I felt hidden. I believed, with every fiber of my being, that I had successfully severed the tie. I believed that Logan was just a scar on my past, fading a little more every day. But as I unlocked my door, I did not know that 300 miles away, in a glass office in Chicago, my name was being spoken. I did not know that escaping a man like Logan is never as simple as driving away. He was a man who viewed people as possessions, and even though he had discarded me, he was about to realize that he had lost something he needed. And more importantly, he was about to make a spectacle of himself that would drag me right back into the spotlight I had fought so hard to leave. The peace of Seabrook Hollow was real, but it was fragile, and the storm was already gathering on the horizon. The news of the wedding arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, carried not by a formal invitation — I was obviously not on that list — but by a phone call from Mara. Mara was one of the few relics from my Chicago life who had managed to cross the border into my new reality. She was loyal, slightly dramatic, and possessed an uncanny ability to gather information that would make the CIA jealous. I was in the back garden of my grandmother's house, wrestling with a stubborn patch of crabgrass, when my phone buzzed in my back pocket. I wiped my dirt-stained hands on my jeans and answered. "Are you sitting down?" Mara asked. Her voice had that specific pitch she used when she had news she considered catastrophic. "I am kneeling in dirt, Mara," I said, wedging the phone between my ear and shoulder so I could pull up a particularly deep root. "What is it? Did the city finally crumble into the lake?" "Logan sent out the invitations," she said. She paused, waiting for the impact. "For the wedding. It is happening next month." I stopped pulling at the weed. I waited for the pang in my chest. I waited for the wave of nausea, the sting of tears, the hot flush of jealousy. I waited to feel like the discarded wife hearing about her replacement's coronation. But the feeling never came. All I felt was a mild curiosity, the kind you might feel when reading about a merger between two companies you do not buy products from. "Okay," I said. "That seems fast, but I suppose he likes to be efficient." "Efficient?" Mara sputtered. "Brianna, it is not efficient. It is a spectacle. They are holding it at the Kensington Grand. Do you know how much a plate costs there? $300, and that is before alcohol. He has invited 500 people. 500. I did not even know Logan knew 500 people. I stood up, brushing the soil from my knees. The Kensington Grand. Of course, it was a venue that screamed old money, even though Logan's money was very new and, as I knew better than anyone, often tied up in projections rather than actual liquidity. "It is not a wedding, Mara," I said, walking toward the porch. "It is a networking event." "He is inviting the entire board of directors," Mara confirmed, her voice lowering to a conspiratorial whisper. "And half the Chamber of Commerce. The invitation is on cardstock so thick you could use it as a weapon. It is embossed with gold leaf. It looks like he is trying to prove something." I knew exactly what he was trying to prove. Logan Hayes did not do things for sentimental reasons. He did things for return on investment. This wedding was his public declaration that he had won. He was telling the world that he had shed the dead weight, me, and upgraded to the newer, younger, flashier model. Tessa was 24, blonde, and looked great in photos. She was the perfect accessory for a man who wanted to project vitality and virility. Marrying her quickly and expensively was his way of controlling the narrative. He was not a middle-aged man having a crisis. He was a titan starting a dynamic new chapter. "Is he happy?" I asked. It was a genuine question. "He looks intense," Mara said, struggling for the right word. "He is posting about it constantly. New beginnings, soulmates, building an empire together. It feels like a marketing campaign. Brie, it feels like he's trying to convince us all that his life is perfect." I sat down on the porch steps, looking out at the ocean. The water was a steel gray today, choppy and restless. "Let him have his campaign," I said. "It has nothing to do with me anymore." "You really do not care?" Mara sounded almost disappointed. I would be furious. She is living in your house, Brianna. She is driving a new car. She is playing the role of the Grand Society hostess. She is welcome to it, I said softly. I know what the cost of admission is for that life. The price is your soul. If she wants to pay it, that is her choice. After I hung up, the contrast between the world Mara had described and the one I was inhabiting became almost comical. In Chicago, right now, Logan was likely standing in a tailor shop on Michigan Avenue, screaming at an assistant because the shade of his pocket square did not perfectly match the floral arrangements. He was likely reviewing seating charts with the intensity of a general planning an invasion, calculating which client needed to sit next to which investor to maximize capital flow. Tessa was probably starving herself to fit into a couture gown, terrified that one wrong look would shatter the illusion of their perfect romance. They were rehearsing speeches. They were practicing smiles. They were building a stage set. I, on the other hand, had a very different Saturday planned. I went into my kitchen, which still smelled faintly of the lemon polish I used on the wood counters. I took a roast chicken out of the oven, the skin crispy and golden. Seasoned with rosemary, I had grown myself in the window box. I did not have to worry about plating it artistically. I did not have to worry about whether it was low-carb enough for Logan's diet. I just tore off a piece of bread, dipped it in the pan juices, and ate it standing up, humming a song that had been stuck in my head all morning. After lunch, I spread my work out on the dining table. I was preparing a presentation for the Henderson Project, a renovation of a historic lighthouse keeper's cottage down the coast. It was real work, tangible work. I was choosing fabrics that would withstand salt spray and wind. I was sourcing local stone. I was solving problems that had solutions, unlike the emotional puzzles of my marriage. I touched the rough texture of a wool sample. It felt real. The Kensington Grand, with its gold leaf and $300 plates, felt like a hallucination. I realized then that Logan's wedding was not a celebration of love. It was a desperate attempt to fill the silence. He needed the noise. He needed the applause. He needed 500 people to look at him and say, "Wow," so he could drown out the quiet, gnawing fear that he was actually quite ordinary. I did not need the noise anymore. I had the ocean. My phone buzzed again an hour later. It was Mara again. "I forgot to tell you the other thing," she said. Her voice was different this time, less dramatic, more serious. "The gossip, the kind people are not saying to his face." "Go on," I said, sketching a window frame on my drafting pad. "There are rumors about the company," Mara said. "Quiet rumors. Apparently, this wedding is costing a fortune. $500,000, maybe more, and people are whispering that he is leveraging the business to pay for it." My pen stopped moving. "That does not make sense," I said, my old instinct to manage his books kicking in for a split second. The quarterly returns were strong. He should have the liquidity. Keywords, should have, Mara said. "But my friend in banking, you know David? He said Logan applied for a bridge loan last week, a personal loan, secured against his equity in the firm, and the interest rate is not pretty. He is bleeding cash. Bree, he bought Tessa a ring that costs more than a condominium. He is redecorating the Lincoln Park house. And now this wedding. David thinks he is doing it to project strength. You know, fake it until you make it. If he looks rich, investors will trust him." I set the pen down. It was a classic Logan move. He believed that perception was reality. If you looked successful, you were successful. He had always played fast and loose with budgets, betting on the next big contract to cover the debts of the last one, but leveraging his equity, risking the company to throw a party. That was not just arrogant. It was reckless. "He is building a castle on a sinkhole," I murmured. "Exactly," Mara said. "Everyone at the wedding is going to be drinking his champagne and eating his lobster, but half of them are wondering if the check is going to clear. It is like watching a train wreck in slow motion, but the train is covered in diamonds." I felt a strange, cold shiver run down my spine. It was not satisfaction. It was not glee. It was the chilling realization of just how close I had come to being on that train. If I had stayed, If I had forgiven him, that bridge loan would have been my problem. That debt would have been attached to my name. I would have been the one standing next to him, smiling until my face hurt, terrified that the house of cards was about to collapse. "Brianna?" Mara asked. "You there?" "I am here," I said. "I am just glad I am not there." "You and me both," she said. "But I will be there. I have to be. Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. I need to see this." "You will have to tell me how it goes," I said. "Oh, I will," she promised. "I have a feeling it is going to be one for the history books." She had no idea how right she was. I hung up and looked back at my drafting paper. The lighthouse cottage. Solid stone. Built to withstand hurricanes. Built to last 100 years. I picked up my pen and went back to work. Across the country, Logan was putting on a tuxedo that probably cost $5,000, preparing to marry a woman he viewed as a trophy, in a room full of people he viewed as stepping stones, paid for with money he did not actually have. He was constructing a fantasy. I was designing a home. The contrast was so sharp it almost cut. I pitied him. I truly did, because I knew something he did not. I knew that you can only borrow against the truth for so long before the debt comes due. And usually, the collection agent arrives at the worst possible moment. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across my floor. I turned on the lamp, the warm yellow light flooding the room. I was alone, but I was solvent. I was single, but I was real. And as I worked into the night, the silence of Seabrook Hollow felt less like emptiness and more like peace. But the wind was picking up outside, rattling the window panes just a little. A storm was coming, not for me, but for him. And though I was hundreds of miles away, I would feel the shockwave when it hit. The fog was rolling in off the Atlantic when my phone rang at 7 o'clock on Sunday morning, in Seabrook Hollow. Sunday mornings are sacred. They are for silence, for strong coffee, and for watching the mist erase the boundary between the sea and the sky. But the phone was vibrating against the pine wood of my nightstand with an urgency that felt violent. It was Mara, again. I hesitated before answering. Part of me wanted to let it go to voicemail. I had spent the previous evening sketching layouts for the Henderson project, intentionally blocking out the knowledge that hundreds of miles away, my ex-husband was performing his happily ever after for an audience of 500. I did not want the hangover of his wedding to bleed into my mourning. But curiosity is a human flaw, and I am only human. I slid my thumb across the screen. "Tell me you are awake," Mara said. Her voice was not the tired, hungover rasp I expected from someone who had just attended a society wedding that likely went until 2 in the morning. She sounded wired. She sounded like she had just witnessed a car crash and was desperate to describe the wreckage. "I am awake now," I said, sitting up and pulling the quilt around my shoulders. "Let me guess. The cake was dry. The speeches were too long. Logan cried during his vows." "No," Mara said. The word came out like a sharp exhale. "Brianna, listen to me. Something happened. Something unbelievable." I walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass. "What happened, Mara? Did the bride trip?" "Better," she said. "Or worse, depending on where you were sitting. There was a guest, a man named Howard Vance." The name rang a faint bell, echoing from a life I thought I had left behind. Howard Vance. He was a relic from my grandmother's era, a blustery, old-school real estate developer who made his money in the 1980s and never let anyone forget it. He was loud, he drank too much scotch, and he had the social filter of a toddler. "I remember him," I said, frowning. Why was Howard Vance at Logan's wedding? He has not been relevant in Chicago social circles for a decade. "Logan's dad invited him," Mara explained. "Apparently, they did business together back in the day, and Samuel Hayes thought it would be good for old times' sake. Logan probably did not even know who he was. He was just another warm body in a tuxedo to fill out the room. I could picture it perfectly. Logan loved a full room. He loved the optics of a crowd. He would not have vetted every single guest on his father's list. assuming they were all just harmless, wealthy padding for his ego. "So Howard got drunk," I said. "That is not news, Mara. That is a Tuesday for him." "He was seated at table 12, Mara continued, her voice dropping lower, intensifying. "That was the money table, Brianna. He was sitting with two of Logan's biggest angel investors and the VP of that venture capital firm Logan has been trying to court for 6 months. The people Logan needs to impress to keep the lights on." I closed my eyes. I could see the scene. The crystal glasses, the candlelight, the floral centerpieces that probably cost more than my car, and in the middle of it, Howard Vance, red-faced and jovial, holding court. "Go on," I said. "They were making small talk," Mara said. "You know how it is, talking about summer homes, tax shelters, the usual boring rich people stuff. Someone mentioned Maine. They were talking about property taxes in Kennebunkport, and Howard, being Howard, slams his hand on the table and says he was just up north last month. He said he took a detour through a little town called Seabrook Hollow because he wanted to see the old Rowe estate." My breath hitched. The Rowe estate. That was my grandmother's maiden name. That was my house. "He told them he ran into you," Mara said. My grip on the phone tightened. "He saw me?" "Apparently so. You were coming out of the post office or something. He recognized you. But that is not the point. The point is what he told the table." I waited. The silence on the line was thick with anticipation. "The investors asked about you," Mara said. "They were being polite. Mostly, you know the tone. 'Oh, poor Brianna. How is she holding up?' One of them, a guy named Sterling, actually laughed and made a joke. He said, 'I bet she is struggling to adjust to a life without a corporate credit card. It must be hard living in a fishing village after Lincoln Park.'" I felt a flash of irritation. Of course, that was the narrative Logan had sold them. I was the helpless, discarded wife, wandering the wilderness, destitute and pathetic. "And then Howard laughed," Mara said. "He laughed so hard he spilled his drink, and he looked right at Sterling and said, 'Struggling? Are you kidding me? The girl is not struggling. She is thriving. She is working for the top design firm in the county, and she just closed the Henderson Restoration Project. She has more talent in her little finger than half the architects in this city.'" I smiled despite myself. Good old Howard. He always did appreciate good work. "But that was not it," Mara said. "That was just the warm-up." Sterling tried to save face. He said, "Well, it is good she has a hobby to keep her busy. Divorce settlements only last so long." And then, Mara whispered, Howard dropped the bomb. "What did he say?" I asked. "He leaned in," Mara said, "and he said, loud enough for the next 3 tables to hear. 'Settlement? She did not need a settlement. You idiots do not know who her grandmother was. Do you? Eleanor Rowe did not just leave her a cottage. She left her the entire Rowe Trust. That girl is sitting on an asset portfolio that would make Logan's little construction company look like a lemonade stand. She is not living in Maine because she has to. She is living there because she can afford to do whatever the hell she wants." I stood frozen in my bedroom. The Rowe Trust. It was an exaggeration. Of course, Howard always exaggerated. The trust was not a bottomless pit of gold bars. It was a collection of intellectual property, land rights, and a very specific, very valuable portfolio of architectural patents my grandfather had secured in the 1960s, which had recently appreciated massively due to a renewable energy clause in the land deeds. It was complicated. It was illiquid. But Howard was right about one thing. It was significant. And I had never, ever told Logan the details. To Logan. Grandma's inheritance was just an old house and some dusty books. The room went quiet, Mara said, savoring the moment. I mean, dead quiet. Brianna, you have to understand. These investors thought Logan was the rainmaker. They thought he was the one with the capital. Suddenly, they are hearing that the wife he dumped, the wife he claimed was a financial drain, was actually the one with the generational wealth. "Where was Logan?" I asked. "That is the best part," Mara said. "He was doing his rounds. He and Tessa were walking past table 12 right as Howard said it. He was coming over to shake hands, to do that fake laugh of his. He had his hand on Sterling's shoulder. Did he hear it? He heard every word, Mara said. I was watching him. Bree, I was 10 feet away. He froze. He literally stopped moving. His hand stayed on Sterling's shoulder, but his fingers went rigid. The color just drained out of his face. It was like someone pulled a plug. He went from flush with champagne to gray in 2 seconds. I could see it. I could see the confident mask slipping. I could see the panic behind his eyes. Not because he had lost the money. He never had the money. But because his narrative had been shattered. He had built his entire public persona on being the provider, the savior, the success. And in one sentence, a drunken old man had turned him into the guy who walked away from a fortune he was too arrogant to notice. And Tessa? I asked. She looked confused, Mara said. She was smiling, but her eyes were darting around. She clearly did not understand what the Roe Trust was. She leaned in and whispered something to Logan, probably asking why everyone was looking at them, but Logan did not answer her. He took his hand off Sterling's shoulder as if the man was on fire. What did he do? He tried to laugh it off, Mara said. He gave this weird, choked little chuckle and said, Howard has had a few too many, I think, but nobody laughed with him. Sterling looked at Logan, then he looked at Howard, and you could see the wheels turning. You could see him recalculating. If Logan was stupid enough to leave a woman with that kind of backing without knowing what she was worth, what else was he missing in his due diligence? It was not about the money, Bree. It was about competence. Logan looked incompetent. Incompetent. That was the word that would kill him. Logan could survive being called cruel. He could survive being called an adulterer. In his world, those were practically badges of honor. But incompetent? Uninformed? Sloppy? That was a death sentence. The mood changed instantly, Mara said. The music started up again, but the energy was gone. The investors started texting. I saw Sterling pull out his phone and walk away from the table. Logan spent the rest of the night chasing people down, talking too fast, sweating through his shirt. It was agonizing to watch, and beautiful. I sat down on the edge of my bed. I looked at my hands. They were the same hands that had dug weeds yesterday. They were the same hands that had signed the divorce papers. Howard had exaggerated. Yes, I was not a billionaire. But he had accidentally revealed a truth that I had guarded fiercely. I was not a victim. I was not destitute. And by revealing it in that room, to those people, he had stripped Logan of his greatest weapon, my supposed helplessness. He looked like he had seen a ghost, Mara added quietly. He looked at Tessa, and for a second, he did not look like a man in love. He looked like a man who realized he had paid a very high price for a very cheap prize. Thank you for telling me, Mara, I said. My voice was calm, but my heart was beating a steady, strong rhythm against my ribs. Are you okay? She asked. I am fine, I said, and I meant it. Go get some sleep. Mara, you sound exhausted. I hung up the phone and walked back to the window. The fog was lifting. The ocean was turning a brilliant, sharp blue. I imagined Logan in his hotel suite right now, waking up next to his new bride, the hangover pounding in his skull, the memory of Howard's voice replaying in his mind. I imagined him wondering if it was true. I imagined him reaching for his phone, frantically Googling Roe Trust, trying to find out what he had missed. He would find crumbs, he would find hints, but he would not find the whole truth, not yet. I turned away from the window and went to the kitchen to pour my coffee. I had a presentation to finish. I had a life to build. And for the first time, I realized that my silence had not just been a shield. It had been a trap. And Logan Hayes had just walked right into it. To understand the full scope of the disaster that unfolded at the Kensington Grand, you have to understand the specific acoustics of a society wedding. It is a room built on whispers. Rumors travel faster than waiters carrying champagne trays. And according to Mara, who recounted the events to me with the precision of a court stenographer, Howard Vance did not just drop a pebble into the pond, he threw a boulder. After Howard had silenced Table 12 with the revelation about the Roe Trust, the atmosphere in the room began to curdle. It was no longer a celebration, it was an audit. Howard, emboldened by the sudden attention of the venture capitalists, decided to elaborate. He was not doing it to hurt Logan. Oddly enough, in his scotch-soaked mind, he probably thought he was paying a compliment to my family, but every word he spoke was a nail in the coffin of Logan's ego. "It is not just the portfolio," Howard boomed, his voice carrying over the polite jazz quartet playing in the corner. "It is the land patents. Eleanor Rowe bought coastal acreage in the 1960s for pennies. Everyone thought she was crazy, just scrubland and rocks. But the woman was a visionary. She set up a grandfathered clause for renewable energy rights. Wind, tidal. Do you have any idea what those leases are worth today? We are talking about passive income that would make a hedge fund manager blush." The guest named Sterling, the one who had previously mocked my imaginary poverty, leaned in. He was no longer looking at his phone. He was looking at Howard with the hungry, respectful eyes of a predator who has just smelled fresh meat. "And Brianna controls this?" Sterling asked. "Sole beneficiary," Howard declared, taking a long pull of his drink. "She has full executive control. She just chooses to live quietly. That is class. Real money does not scream. Gentlemen, real money whispers." That was the line that did it. Real money does not scream. The irony was so thick it was choking the room, because everything about Logan's wedding was screaming. The 10-foot floral walls, the ice sculptures, the gold leaf invitations, it all suddenly looked desperate. It looked like the frantic posturing of a man trying to convince the world he mattered. In contrast, the image Howard had painted of me, living quietly in a cottage, sitting on a fortune, working because I wanted to, not because I had to, made me look untouchable. Logan, standing just a few feet away, felt the shift in the room's gravity. He saw the way the investors were looking at him. It was not admiration anymore. It was confusion. It was the look you give a man who unknowingly threw a winning lottery ticket into the trash can. He turned to Tessa. Tessa was standing beside him, clutching her bouquet of white orchids. She looked perfect in her designer gown, but her smile was starting to waver. She could sense the temperature drop, but she did not understand the source. She was young, and she was new to this world. She thought the tension was just wedding nerves. Logan grabbed her arm. It was not a gentle lover's touch. It was a grip. "Did you know about this?" he hissed. His voice was low, but in the sudden quiet of the nearby tables, it was audible. Tessa blinked, her false eyelashes fluttering. "Know about what, Logan? You are hurting me." "The trust," Logan snapped, leaning closer to her face. "The land rights, the patents. Did you know she had that? You said you checked her financials. You said you saw the bank statements when you were organizing my home office before the divorce." "I saw the joint account," Tessa whispered back, her voice rising in panic. "I saw her personal savings. There was barely $50,000 in there. She drove a 5-year-old sedan. Logan? She clipped coupons. How was I supposed to know she was sitting on a renewable energy portfolio?" "You were supposed to be thorough," Logan ground out. "That is your job. That is why I—" He cut himself off, but the damage was done. The implication hung in the air like smoke. "That is why I hired you. That is why I kept you around. Because you were supposed to be smarter than her." Tessa recoiled, as if he had slapped her. For the first time, the guests saw the crack in the romance. They saw that this marriage was not a union of soulmates. It was a merger, and the CEO was unhappy with the acquisition. But the humiliation was not over. The universe, it seemed, had decided to balance the scales all at once. A man sitting at the adjacent table, a sharp-tongued broker named Marcus, who had known Logan for years, let out a short, dry laugh. He had clearly had enough champagne to lower his inhibitions, and he had been listening to the exchange with amusement. "It is rich, isn't it?" Marcus said, loud enough for Logan to hear. "Here we are, eating lobster at $300 a head, And I heard the venue threatened to cancel yesterday because the second installment of the deposit bounced. The silence that followed was absolute. The jazz band had stopped playing between songs, and in that void, Marcus's comment landed like a grenade. Logan spun around to face Marcus. His face, which had been pale, flushed a deep, ugly crimson. "Excuse me?" Logan said. "Come on, Hayes," Marcus said, swirling his glass. "This is a small town in a big city. My cousin works in accounts receivable for the Kensington. She said they had to chase you for 3 days to get the wire transfer to clear. You are leveraging the company assets to pay for the party. And meanwhile, your ex-wife, the one you traded in, is apparently the only person in this equation with actual liquidity." Marcus took a sip of his wine and delivered the final blow. "It kind of makes you wonder about your judgment, doesn't it? If you could not spot the value in your own wife for 8 years, how are we supposed to trust you with our capital?" It was a direct attack on his professional competence. It was the one thing Logan could not tolerate. He could handle being hated. He could not handle being laughed at. Logan took a step toward the table. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. The charm was gone. The polished executive facade had melted away, revealing the terrified, insecure bully underneath. "You do not know what you are talking about," Logan said, his voice shaking. "I built this company from nothing. I generated $3 million in revenue last quarter." "Revenue is not profit, Logan," Marcus said calmly, "and debt is not wealth." "I am the one who made her," Logan shouted. The volume of his voice shocked everyone. It was a shout that did not belong in a ballroom. It was ragged and desperate. "She was nothing before me," Logan yelled, pointing a trembling finger at the ghost of me he saw in his head. "She was an assistant. I gave her a life. I gave her a name. If she has money, it is because she learned how to manage it from watching me." "It sounds like she learned how to hide it from you," Sterling interjected quietly. "Which, frankly, seems like a smart move." Logan turned on Sterling, his eyes wild. "I did not want her money. I wanted a wife who was actually present, a wife who was not a piece of furniture." He was losing it. He was airing his grievances to a room full of people who only cared about spreadsheets. He was trying to justify his betrayal, but all he was doing was highlighting his own blindness. "Tessa is 10 times the woman she was," Logan announced, grabbing Tessa's hand and pulling her forward roughly. Tessa looked mortified. She tried to pull away, but he held on. "Tessa understands the vision. Tessa is the future." "Tessa looks like she wants to crawl under the table," a woman's voice murmured from the back. Logan whipped his head around, searching for the speaker. "Who said that? Who said that?" The music had stopped completely now. The band members were holding their instruments, staring wide-eyed at the groom who was unraveling in the center of the dance floor. The waiters had frozen against the walls. 500 guests were watching Logan Hayes self-destruct. He looked around the room, frantic, searching for an ally. He looked at his father, Samuel, but Samuel Hayes was staring at his plate, refusing to meet his son's eyes. He looked at the investors. They were exchanging glances, the kind that meant pull the term sheet. He looked at Tessa. She was crying, silent tears ruining her makeup, not out of joy, but out of pure, unadulterated embarrassment. And then Logan stopped. He looked at the empty space where I should have been, and the color drained from his face again, this time for good. It was not the money. I know Logan. He loves money, yes, but he loves being right even more. The reason he turned pale, the reason his mouth opened and closed without making a sound, was because the realization finally hit him. He realized that for 8 years, he had treated me like a liability when I was the biggest asset he had ever touched. He realized that while he was busy playing business tycoon, I had been the one with the real power, the real security, and the real class. He realized that he had left a woman who could have bought and sold him, not just financially, but intellectually. He had spent months telling everyone I was the loser. He had invited them here to watch him celebrate his victory, and instead, He had just proven to every important person in Chicago that he was a man who could not tell the difference between gold and glitter. Logan started, but his voice cracked. He looked at Howard Vance, who was oblivious to the carnage he had caused, happily eating a bread roll. "Play the music," Logan screamed at the band. "Play the damn music." The band scrambled to start playing. A frantic, upbeat pop song filled the air, clashing horribly with the mood in the room. Logan turned and marched toward the bar, leaving his crying bride standing alone in the middle of the dance floor. He did not look like a conqueror. He looked like a man running away from a fire he had set himself. Mara told me that people started leaving 20 minutes later. They did not say goodbye. They just slipped out the back, texting their drivers, eager to distance themselves from the smell of failure. I sat in my kitchen in Seabrook Hollow, listening to Mara's voice tremble as she described the scene. I looked out at the dark ocean. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel joy. I just felt a quiet sense of completion. Logan had wanted to be the center of attention. He had wanted everyone to talk about him. Well, he got his wish. They were certainly talking, but they were not telling the story he wanted them to tell. They were telling the story of the man who laughed when he lost a diamond, only to realize too late that he was holding a handful of dust. In the age of the smartphone, privacy is a myth we tell ourselves to sleep better at night. By the time the waiters at the Kensington Grand had cleared the dessert plates, most of which remained untouched, the video of Logan's meltdown had already crossed state lines. It did not appear on the evening news or the front page of the tabloids. That would have been manageable. Today's news is tomorrow's fish and chip paper. No, the damage was far more surgical and far more permanent. The video circulated in the private, encrypted group chats of Chicago's business elite. It pinged on phones in the back seats of town cars, in the quiet corners of country clubs, and in the bedrooms of the very investors Logan had spent the last year courting. I saw the clip the next morning. Mara forwarded it to me with no caption, just a file attachment. The video was shaky, likely filmed from a phone resting against a wine glass or held under a table. The audio, however, was crystal clear. It captured the exact moment Logan Hayes ceased to be a promising young CEO and became a liability. In the footage, Logan looked deranged. His face was slick with sweat, his tuxedo tie crooked, his finger jabbing violently at the empty air. You could hear the crack in his voice as he screamed, "I am the one who made her." You could see the terrified recoil of his new bride, but the most damaging part was not the anger, it was the loss of control. In the world of high finance and corporate construction, adultery is a common, almost boring vice. Investors do not pull funding because a man cheats on his wife. They do not cancel contracts because a CEO is a bad person. If morality were a prerequisite for business in Chicago, half the skyscrapers would remain unbuilt. But stability? Stability is non-negotiable. When the sun rose on Monday morning, the fallout began. It did not arrive with a bang, but with the soft, incessant ping of incoming emails. Logan's executive assistant, not Tessa, who was conspicuously absent, but the junior secretary he had hired to replace her former role, watched in horror as the calendar began to clear itself. The 10 o'clock meeting with the venture capital group? Cancelled. The lunch with the zoning commissioner? Postponed indefinitely. The site walkthrough for the new riverfront development? Rescheduled to a date that did not exist. The emails were masterpieces of corporate rejection. They were polite, professional, and absolutely lethal. In light of recent developments, we feel it is best to pause our partnership discussions. We are currently reviewing our vendor list and will place your contract on hold. The board has decided to move in a different direction. The video had framed Logan not as a cheater, but as a man who crumbled under pressure. If he could not handle a heckler at his own wedding, how could he handle a union strike? If he screamed at his investors over a dinner table, how would he behave in a boardroom negotiation? He had revealed himself to be volatile, and there is nothing money hates more than volatility. By Tuesday afternoon, the internal bleeding had started. My phone rang again, but this time it was not Mara. It was David, a structural engineer who had been with Logan's company since the beginning. He was a good man, steady and reliable, one of the few who had looked me in the eye when I visited the office in the final months of my marriage. "Brianna," he said, his voice echoing slightly as if he were walking down a hallway. "I just wanted to let you know. I resigned an hour ago." "I am sorry to hear that, David," I said, though I was not surprised. "I am not the only one," he said. "The CFO walked out this morning, and Sarah from Client Relations is packing her box right now. It is a slaughterhouse here, Bree. The phone lines are lighting up with clients asking if the rumors about the company's liquidity are true. That comment about the bounced deposit? It spooked everyone." "Is it true?" I asked. "About the liquidity?" "It is worse than true," David sighed. "We looked at the books. He has been moving money around like a shell game to pay for the personal expenses, the wedding, the redecorating, the car for Tessa. He was treating the company operating account like his personal piggy bank, banking on the Sterling deal to fill the hole. Now that the Sterling deal is dead, the hole is just a hole." "Where is Logan?" I asked. "Locked in his office," David said. "He is shouting at people on the phone. He fired the receptionist because she put a call through from a vendor asking for payment. It is over. Brianna, I just wanted to say, you got out at the right time. We all should have followed you sooner." While Logan's professional world was imploding, his personal victory was also dissolving into pixels. Tessa Lane, the woman who had spent the last 6 months curating her life for an audience of Instagram followers, suddenly went dark. Before the wedding, her feed had been a relentless parade of white silk, diamond rings, and captions about soulmates and haters. She had posted a photo every hour leading up to the ceremony, but by Monday evening, the account was gone. If you searched for her handle, you were met with a blank gray screen and the words, "User not found." It was an admission of defeat more humiliating than any public statement. She could not handle the comments. The internet, cruel and quick, had descended on her page. They were not just mocking the wedding, they were mocking her ignorance. People were posting screenshots of Howard's revelation about the trust, tagging her with captions like, "When you marry for money but forget to check the credit score." She had married Logan to be envied. Instead, she had become a punchline. She deleted the wedding photos, the engagement videos, the honeymoon countdowns. She scrubbed her digital existence clean, trying to erase the evidence of a triumph that had turned into a trap. But the cruelest twist of the knife came from the one person Logan thought would always be in his corner. Samuel Hayes, Logan's father, was a man who cared about two things: his legacy and his country club membership. He was the one who had invited Howard Vance. He was the one who had insisted on inviting the old guard to the wedding to show off his son's success. When the video circulated, Samuel did not see a son in distress. He saw his own surname being dragged through the mud. Mara told me about the confrontation. It happened in the lobby of the Kensington Grand the morning after the wedding, while guests were checking out. Samuel cornered Logan by the elevators. He did not lower his voice. "You embarrassed me," Samuel spat at his son. "I vouched for you. I told Howard. I told Sterling. I told everyone that you were a serious man. And you stood there and screamed like a petulant child." "You invited him," Logan argued, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with dark circles. "You brought Howard there. This is your fault." "I brought him there to witness your success," Samuel countered. "I did not tell you to marry a woman who cannot do basic due diligence. I did not tell you to leverage your equity to throw a party you could not afford. You made us look like fools. Logan, you made the Hayes name look cheap." "I am fixing it," Logan pleaded. "I just need a few days to—" "You are on your own," Samuel said, cutting him off with a wave of his hand. "Do not come to me for a bailout. I am not throwing good money after bad. You wanted to be the big man? Be the big man. Fix your own mess." And then, Samuel Hayes turned his back on his son and walked out of the hotel, stepping into his waiting car without looking back. I sat on my porch in Seabrook Hollow. watching the fishing boats bob in the harbor. The wind was cold, biting at my cheeks, but I felt strangely warm. I was not happy. I want to be clear about that. Happiness is a bright, active emotion. What I felt was something heavier, more grounded. I felt the satisfaction of a physicist watching an equation balance itself out. For years, Logan had operated on the belief that he was exempt from the laws of cause and effect. He believed he could treat people like disposable objects and never face a consequence. He believed he could build a life on a foundation of lies and never worry about the ground shifting. He was wrong. I did not have to lift a finger. I did not have to leak the video. I did not have to call the investors. I did not have to sabotage his company. All I had to do was exist and let gravity do the rest. The scandal was not that he had left me. The scandal was that in leaving me, he had exposed his own incompetence. He had shown the world that he was a man who abandoned substance for shine. And in the brutal arithmetic of business, that is the one sin that cannot be forgiven. I took a sip of my tea. It was Earl Grey, hot and strong. My phone buzzed with one final message from Mara. The bank just froze the company credit cards. The caterer is threatening to sue for the rest of the bill. I put the phone down, face down on the table. The silence of the ocean was vast and deep. I listened to the waves crashing against the rocks, tearing them down grain by grain, just as they had been doing for 1,000,000 years. It was just erosion, that is all it was. Logan Hayes was finally eroding, and I was just the shore he had crashed against. The phone call came 3 weeks after the wedding disaster. On a Tuesday evening while I was folding laundry, when I saw the name flashing on the screen, I did not feel a spike of adrenaline or a pang of longing. I felt the weary resignation of someone realizing they have to take out the trash in the rain. "Hello, Logan," I said. "Brianna." His voice was different. The sharp, commanding edge that usually defined his speech was gone, replaced by a softness that felt manufactured. It was the voice he used when he wanted to close a deal that was slipping away. "I did not think you would answer." "I almost did not," I admitted, putting the phone on speaker so I could finish folding a towel. "What do you want? Logan? I am assuming you are not calling to ask for a recipe." "I wanted to hear your voice," he said. He paused, waiting for me to soften. When I remained silent, he cleared his throat. "I have been doing a lot of thinking, Bree, about us, about the last 8 years. I think we made a mistake. I think we rushed into the divorce without really talking." I almost laughed. "You moved your mistress into our house before the ink was dry on the filing papers. Logan, I would not call that rushing. I would call that strategic planning." "That is what I want to explain," he said quickly. Things are complicated right now. I need to see you. I am in Maine." My hands stopped moving. "You are in Maine?" "I drove up," he said. "I am staying at a motel in Portland. I can be in Seabrook Hollow in an hour. Please, Brianna, just 20 minutes. We are adults. We owe it to each other to have one conversation that is not through lawyers." I considered saying no. It would have been easy. I could have hung up, blocked his number, and gone back to my quiet life. But I knew Logan. If I refused, he would just show up at my doorstep. He would park his car in my driveway and refuse to leave until he had said his piece. It was better to contain the blast radius. "Fine," I said. "There is a coffee shop on Main Street called the Driftwood. Meet me there in an hour. Do not come to the house." "Thank you, Bree," he said, sounding relieved. "I just want to talk." I hung up. I did not rush to the mirror. I did not change into a power suit or apply armor-like makeup. I was wearing jeans and a thick, oatmeal-colored sweater because it was chilly outside. I pulled my hair back into a messy bun, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. I had no interest in proving to him that I was beautiful or successful. My indifference was the only statement I needed to make. When I arrived at the Driftwood, Logan was already there. He was sitting at a small corner table, and the change in his appearance was startling. He was wearing a suit. Of course, Logan did not own casual clothes, but it looked slightly rumpled, as if he had slept in it. His face was gray, the skin tight around his eyes. which were bloodshot. The confident, golden boy glow was gone, extinguished by weeks of panic and public humiliation. He looked like a man who had been running a marathon in a room with no air. He stood up when I approached, and reflex of old manners. "Brianna," he said, reaching out as if to hug me. I stepped back, keeping the table between us. "Sit down, Logan." He sat, looking stung. "You look good, healthy. The country air suits you." "It does," I said, signaling the waitress for a black tea. "You look tired." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "It has been a rough month. You heard about the wedding, I assume?"
"I heard."
"People blow things out of proportion," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Howard Vance was drunk. He started shouting nonsense, and everyone got dramatic. It was a misunderstanding. He was testing the waters. He wanted to see how much I knew, how much I believed." It did not sound like a misunderstanding. "Logan," I said evenly. "It sounded like a revelation." He flinched. He picked up his coffee cup, his hand trembling slightly. "Look, that is actually why I wanted to talk to you. Howard mentioned something surprising about your grandmother, about a trust." Here it was, the pivot. He had lasted less than 3 minutes before bringing up the money. "He mentioned the Roe Trust," Logan said, leaning in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Bree, why didn't you tell me? If I had known you were dealing with that kind of complexity, land rights, patents, tax implications, I would have helped you. You know I have the best financial team in Chicago. You shouldn't have to handle that burden alone." I stared at him. It was almost impressive how quickly he tried to reframe the narrative. He was not asking for money. Oh no. He was offering to manage it for me. He was trying to position himself as the benevolent expert, coming to save the naive little woman from the scary world of high finance. "I am managing just fine, I said. "Are you?" He looked around the modest coffee shop with a sneer he couldn't quite hide. "You are living in a shack in the middle of nowhere. You are working a retail job. Brianna, be realistic. These trusts are tricky. If you do not have the right structure, the taxes will eat you alive. I can help you. I can set up a shell corporation, shelter the assets. We can figure this out together." "We?" I asked. "We are still legally connected in many ways," he lied. "And frankly, with the market the way it is, you need protection. I am just looking out for you. I still care about you. Brianna, I never stopped." I took a slow sip of my tea. The warmth spread through my chest, contrasting with the icy clarity in my mind. "Logan," I said softly, "stop." "Stop what? I am trying to—" "You are trying to find a life raft," I said. "I know about the bridge loan. I know about the investors walking away. I know your company is bleeding out. You did not drive 500 miles because you missed me. You drove here because you ran out of options." His face hardened. The mask of concern slipped, revealing the desperation underneath. "It is a temporary cash flow problem," he snapped. "I just need a liquidity injection to stabilize the accounts until the next quarter. If you have this capital sitting there doing nothing, it is stupid not to leverage it. I could double your investment in 6 months." "My investment?" I raised an eyebrow. 10 minutes ago, you were just offering to help me with my taxes. Now you want to invest my money?" "It is a partnership," he insisted, his voice rising. People at the next table glanced over. "We were partners for 8 years. Brianna, doesn't that mean anything to you? I built a life for us. I supported you while you played house. Now, when I hit a rough patch, you are just going to sit there on a pile of gold and watch me drown?" "You supported me?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously low. "You erased me, Logan. You treated me like an employee who wasn't performing up to standards. You replaced me the second you found someone shinier." "I made a mistake," he said, running a hand through his hair. Tessa is a child. She doesn't understand me. She doesn't understand the business. You do. You were always the smart one. Bree, I see that now. I should never have let you go." "You did not let me go," I corrected him. "I left. and I did not leave because I was angry. I left because I was indifferent, and that is what I feel right now. Logan, indifference. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He could handle anger. He could handle tears. He could not handle the fact that he simply did not matter to me anymore. "So that is it?" he sneered, his tone turning nasty. "You are going to be the bitter ex-wife? You are going to let me fail just to spite me? You are going to hoard this money just to prove a point?" "It is not about the money," I said. "It is always about the money." He slammed his hand on the table, rattling the spoons. "Don't give me that moral high ground garbage. You are enjoying this. You are sitting there, playing the saint, knowing you have the checkbook that could save everything. You are punishing me because I didn't realize you were rich." I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw a man who defined his entire existence by his net worth, a man who measured love, respect, and worthiness in dollars and cents. "You have it backwards, Logan," I said. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him. "You left me when you believed I had no value," I said. "You threw me away because you thought I was nothing but a depreciating asset, and now you are sitting here, begging, only because you think I have a price tag attached to me again." "I am not begging," he hissed. "You are," I said. "But here is the problem. Logan, you are making the same mistake you made in our marriage. You are looking at the surface and assuming you see the whole picture." He frowned. "What are you talking about?" "You heard Howard say trust and patents, and you saw dollar signs," I said. "You think I am sitting on a vault of cash that I just stumbled into? You think I am lucky." "Aren't you?" he challenged. "You inherited it. You didn't earn it." I stood up. I placed a $5 bill on the table for my tea. "That is where you are wrong," I said. "And that is why you will never understand me. You think the value of the Roe Trust is the money. It isn't." I paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. "You don't know anything about me, Logan," I said quietly. "You don't know what I do. You don't know what I'm capable of, and you certainly don't know the truth about what you heard at that wedding." He froze, his eyes narrowed. "What truth?" "Howard said—" "Howard is an old man who likes to tell stories," I said. "He got the headline right, but he missed the fine print. And you? You never bothered to read the fine print in your life." I turned to leave. "Wait!" Logan scrambled up, grabbing my wrist. "What does that mean? What fine print?" I pulled my arm away. It was not a violent motion, just a firm detachment. "Go home, Logan," I said. "Go back to Chicago. Save your company if you can. But do not look for salvation here. The Bank of Brianna Hayes is closed, and frankly, it never accepted your currency." I walked out of the driftwood and into the crisp autumn air. I did not look back. I could feel his eyes boring into my back, confused, angry, and terrified. He was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. He thought the twist was that I was rich. He had no idea that the real twist was not about what I had, but what I had done with it. He thought he was losing a fortune. He didn't realize he was losing a war he didn't even know he was fighting. Logan did not let me walk away. He followed me to the parking lot, his footsteps heavy and uneven on the gravel. He moved with the frantic energy of a man who sees the last lifeboat pulling away from the Titanic and believes he can still swim to it if he just argues hard enough. "You cannot just drop a bomb like that and leave," he said, blocking the driver's side door of my car. He was out of breath. "What fine print?" "Brianna, if there is money, there is money. Math does not have fine print." "Math does not," I said, standing my ground. "But law does, and so does legacy." I leaned against the car door, crossing my arms. I realized that if I did not explain this to him, really explain it in the language he understood, the language of assets and liabilities, he would never leave me alone. He would haunt my periphery, sending lawyers and investigators, trying to find the pot of gold he thought I was hiding. I needed to kill his hope, and to kill it, I had to show him exactly what he had missed. "Howard Vance sees the world through a Scotch glass," I began, my voice steady against the wind. He told your investors that I inherited a fortune. That is the headline. But here is the reality. Logan, my grandmother did not leave me a bank account filled with millions of dollars. She left me a house that needed a new roof and a portfolio of intellectual property that had been sitting in a safety deposit box for 40 years. Logan frowned, his brow furrowing. Intellectual property? She was a housewife. She was a drafter, I corrected him. Before she married my grandfather, she worked for one of the first civil engineering firms in Maine. She designed coastal erosion barriers. She held 6 patents for modular seawall construction. They were brilliant, sustainable designs. But in the 1970s, nobody cared about rising sea levels. They were worthless paper. Logan looked confused. He was trying to do the calculation, but the variables were not fitting into his spreadsheet. So Howard lied? He asked, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. No, I said. He just saw the end result without seeing the work. You see, when I moved here, I did not just sit on the porch. I took those patents to Graham Sutter at Harborline Atelier. We updated the engineering for modern materials. We spent 3 months building a proposal for the state's new coastal resilience initiative. We pitched it against the biggest firms in Boston. I took a step closer to him, letting him see the fire in my eyes that he had never bothered to look for when we were married. We won the contract. Logan, I said, not because I am a row, not because I have a trust fund. We won because my design was better. The value Howard was bragging about, the millions in future revenue, that did not come from a dead relative. That came from me. I negotiated the licensing deal. I structured the royalties. I turned a stack of old paper into a renewable energy asset. Logan stared at me, his mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He was looking for the passive wife who needed him to balance the checkbook. Instead, he was staring at a woman who had just closed a deal more complex than anything he had managed in his entire career. You, he stammered, you put the deal together? I did, I said. So when you ask for a loan, or you offer to manage my assets, you are making a fundamental error. You think I found a winning lottery ticket, but I did not find the money. Logan, I made the money, and that means I know exactly what it is worth, and I know exactly who deserves a share of it. He looked as if I had spoken in a foreign language. In Logan's world, women like me, quiet, supportive, domestic, did not broker government contracts. We were the background noise, not the lead negotiators. But it is still a marital asset, he said suddenly, latching on to the one lifeline he thought he had. His eyes lit up with a desperate, predatory gleam. The patents. You inherited them while we were married. The work you did. You started it before the divorce was final, didn't you? That makes it community property. If you generated value from an asset acquired during the marriage, I am entitled to a percentage. He straightened up, his confidence surging back. He thought he had found the loophole. He thought he could sue his way into salvation. I looked at him with genuine pity. I was wondering when you would try that, I said. Do you remember the day you asked for the divorce, Logan? Do you remember how much of a hurry you were in? What does that have to do with this? You wanted to marry Tessa, I reminded him. You wanted the wedding to happen before the summer gala season. You told your lawyer to draft the fastest, cleanest separation agreement possible. You did not want a discovery period. You did not want an audit. You just wanted me gone. Logan went still. I remember reading the draft, I continued, my voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Clause 14, Section B, the clean break provision. You insisted on it. It states that both parties waive all future claims to any assets, inheritances, or intellectual property, known or unknown, regardless of when they were acquired, in exchange for an expedited decree. I saw the memory hit him. I saw him remember sitting in his glass office, laughing with his lawyer, telling him to just give her whatever she wants and get her to sign so I can move on. He had been so arrogant, so sure that I had nothing of value, that he had signed away his right to investigate. You signed it, Logan, I said. You initialed every page. You were so afraid I would come after your company that you built a wall to keep me out. But you did not realize that walls work both ways. That wall does not just protect your debt, it protects my success." He slumped against the car. The predatory gleam vanished, replaced by a hollow, sickening realization. He had engineered his own defeat. He had been so busy protecting his imaginary empire from his gold-digger wife that he had legally locked himself out of the only real fortune in the family. "You knew," he whispered. "When you signed the papers, you knew about the patents." "I knew they existed," I said. "I did not know if they would work, but I knew one thing for sure. I was not going to build another castle for a man who would lock me in the tower. If I was going to succeed, it was going to be for me, solely for me." Logan looked at me, and for the first time, I saw fear. Not the fear of bankruptcy, but a deeper, more primal fear. He was looking at me and realizing that he had absolutely no power over me. I was not angry. I was not hysterical. I was armed with the truth and protected by the law he had paid for. "I can fight it," he said weakly. "I can claim I was under duress. I can say you hid assets." "You can try," I said, "but you have no money for lawyers. Logan, and I do. I have the best retainer in the state now. Do you really want to spend the last of your dwindling credit on a lawsuit you will lose? Or do you want to go back to Chicago and try to salvage what is left of your dignity?" He looked down at his shoes. The shiny Italian leather was scuffed with Maine dirt. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. His voice was small, like a child asking why it is raining. "Back then, if you had told me you had these ideas, if you had shown me the designs, we could have done it together. We could have been a power couple. Why did you hide that part of yourself?" "I didn't hide it, Logan," I said. "I tried to show you, 1,000 times. When I talked about design, you checked your email. When I tried to give you advice on your projects, you told me to stick to picking out curtains. You didn't see me because you didn't think there was anything worth seeing." I opened my car door. "You fell in love with a reflection, Logan," I said. "You wanted a mirror, not a partner, and when the mirror started to speak, you broke it. You cannot blame the shards for cutting you now." Logan stood there, silent and defeated. The wind whipped around us, carrying the scent of salt and impending winter. He looked small. The suit that had cost $5,000 looked like a costume. The man who had commanded boardrooms was now just a trespasser in a parking lot, shivering in the cold. "Go home," I repeated. "There is nothing for you here, not money, not love, not even revenge. There is just me, living a life that has nothing to do with you." I got into the car and started the engine. I did not wait for him to step aside. He moved automatically, drifting out of the way like a leaf caught in a draft. As I pulled out of the lot, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was still standing there, watching me go. He looked like a man who had finally solved a riddle, only to realize the answer was the one thing he could not live with. He had not lost me to another man. He had not lost me to tragedy. He had lost me to his own blindness. And now, seeing me clearly for the first time, seeing the competence, the wealth, the freedom, he realized that the woman he had discarded was the only person who could have actually saved him. But it was too late. The contract was signed, the ink was dry, and the road ahead of me was wide open. The collapse of Logan Hayes did not happen with a bang, but with the squeak of a dry erase marker on a whiteboard in a conference room in downtown Chicago. Logan had returned to the city with the desperate energy of a man trying to outrun an avalanche. He had secured a meeting with a private equity firm, a group known for buying distressed assets. It was a humiliating step down from the prestige investors he had courted at his wedding, but he had no choice. He needed cash, and he needed it yesterday. He stood at the head of the table, pitching a restructuring plan. He talked about leaner operations and refocused priorities. He used every buzzword in the dictionary to sound like a visionary leader weathering a storm, rather than a captain whose ship was already underwater. The lead partner, a woman named Sharon with eyes like flint, let him speak for 20 minutes without interruption. When he finished, she did not look at his graphs. She looked at a file on her tablet. "We have seen the video," "Logan," she said. The room went deadly silent. "That was a personal matter," Logan said, his smile tight and brittle. "It has no bearing on the operational capacity of the company." "It has everything to do with it," Sharon replied. "We require a clause in our acquisition contracts regarding leadership stability and ethical conduct. Frankly, your behavior at the Kensington Grand suggests a volatility we are not comfortable ensuring, but that is not the deal-breaker." She slid a piece of paper across the table. "We received an anonymous tip this morning regarding your quarterly filings," she said. "It seems there is a discrepancy between the revenue you reported to the bank and the actual invoices sent to clients, a difference of about $400,000. Logan stared at the paper. It was a spreadsheet he had thought was buried deep in a password-protected server. It was the creative accounting he had used to pay for the engagement ring and the deposit on the wedding venue. "Who sent this?" Logan whispered. "Does it matter?" Sharon asked, standing up. "We are passing on the deal, Logan, and we are legally obligated to forward this to the regulatory board. Good luck." The twist was not that a stranger had exposed him. It was that the email had come from inside the house. I learned later, through the grapevine that still connected me to the city, that the leak had come from Miller, a mid-level accounts manager. Miller was a quiet man, the kind of employee Logan had never bothered to learn the name of, the kind of man Logan had frequently referred to as a bean counter in staff meetings. Logan had underestimated him, just as he had underestimated me. He assumed that because Miller was quiet, he was loyal. He forgot that the people you ignore are the ones who have the most time to watch what you are doing. When Logan walked out of that building, he walked into a world that had fundamentally changed. His credit lines were frozen, his reputation was radioactive, and the one person he expected to comfort him was already packing her bags. I imagine the scene at the Lincoln Park house was quiet. There were no screaming matches this time. Tessa Lane was not a woman who wasted energy on lost causes. She had married Logan because he was a ladder. Now that the ladder had snapped, she had no intention of going down into the pit with him. "You lied to me," she reportedly told him as she zipped up her Louis Vuitton suitcase, a suitcase he had paid for. "I am going through a rough patch," Logan pleaded. "We are married, Tessa, for better or for worse." "I signed up for the better," she said, checking her reflection in the hallway mirror. "I did not sign up to be the wife of a fraud. I have a brand to protect. Logan, being associated with you right now is social suicide." She left him in the house he had remodeled for her, surrounded by the expensive furniture he could no longer afford. She filed for an annulment 3 days later, citing fraud. She claimed he had misrepresented his financial status. In the end, the mistress who had helped destroy my marriage turned out to be the most pragmatic person in his life. She treated him exactly the way he had treated me, as a transaction that was no longer profitable. Logan sat in the empty hallway, and for the first time, he understood the architecture of his own destruction. It was not me. It was not Howard Vance. It was not the video. It was him. He realized that every decision he had made for the last decade had been about surface over substance. He had chosen a wife for her looks, a wedding for the photos, and a business strategy based on bluffing. He had built a life out of papier-mâché and was shocked when it dissolved in the rain. He had been the architect of his own isolation. While Logan was watching his world dismantle itself, I was standing in the conference room at Harborline Atelier, watching a very different future unfold. Graham Sutter walked in with a bottle of champagne and a printed email. "We got it," Graham said, grinning through his beard. It was the confirmation from the Coastal Development Group. They had officially chosen Harborline for the Lighthouse Restoration Project, a contract that would secure the studio's finances for the next 5 years. But it was the feedback in the email that made me pause. "We received bids from larger firms in Boston and New York," the client wrote, "but we chose Harborline because of the integrity of your proposal. In an industry full of flash and impossible promises, your lead designer, Ms. Hayes, offered us stability, honesty, and a realistic vision we could trust. We value the ethical standards your team represents." I read that sentence twice. Stability, honesty, ethics. The very things Logan had called boring, the very traits he had mocked as vintage furniture, those were the currencies that had bought my freedom. That evening, as I was walking back to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I had not saved, but one I knew by heart. I was wrong. That was it. 3 words. I looked at the screen. I waited for a feeling. I waited for a surge of vindication, or a wave of sadness, or even a flash of anger, but there was nothing. The text was powerless. It was a message sent from a ghost. It came too late, and it asked for too much. He wanted absolution. He wanted me to text back and say, "It is okay." Logan, he wanted me to share the burden of his guilt so he did not have to carry it alone. But I was done carrying his bags. I did not reply. I did not type out a scathing retort. I simply tapped the button that said, "Block caller," and then I deleted the thread. It was the final legal act of our relationship. The severance was complete. I drove home to the cottage. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the garden. I walked out to the edge of the bluff and looked down at the ocean. There is a final twist to this story, one that I have never told anyone, not even Mara. When Howard Vance stood up at that wedding and revealed the existence of the Roe Trust, everyone assumed it was the accidental rambling of a drunk man. They assumed it was a coincidence that he happened to be there, and a coincidence that he happened to know about my life. But I know something about coincidences. They rarely happen in business. 2 weeks before the wedding, I had mailed a package to Howard's office in Chicago. Inside was a bottle of his favorite 20-year-old single malt scotch and a handwritten note. The note was simple. It read, "Dear Howard, I hope this finds you well. I hear you will be attending the Hayes wedding at the Kensington. I will not be there, as I am busy managing the Roe family patents up here in Maine. We just secured a wonderful government contract. It is a shame I cannot celebrate Logan's big day, but I am enjoying my quiet life. Have a drink for me." I did not tell him to make a scene. I did not tell him to humiliate Logan. I did not tell him to mention the trust. I did not have to. I knew Howard. I knew that if I gave him a bottle of scotch and a piece of gossip, nature would take its course. I knew that Howard, a man who respected old money and hated new pretension, would take one look at Logan's flashy, debt-ridden spectacle and feel the urge to correct the record. I had not pulled the trigger. I had simply left a loaded gun on the table and walked away. Standing in the garden, smelling the salt and the damp earth, I realized that was the true nature of revenge. It does not have to be a scream. It does not have to be a fight. Sometimes, the most devastating revenge is simply allowing people to be exactly who they are, in front of an audience. Logan Hayes was a man who needed to be seen, and now, he had been seen completely. I turned back to the house. The windows were glowing with warm, yellow light. My drafting table was waiting for me, covered in blueprints for a home that would stand against the wind for 100 years. I had a project to finish. I had a garden to tend. I had a life that was entirely, beautifully my own. The victory was not that Logan had lost. The victory was that I had stopped keeping score. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to hear where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Logan's karma. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and smash that hype button so we can share this journey with even more people.